Very good to see you. Thank you for being here. My name is Annelies Beck. I'll be my host. But mostly you are here, of course, for Mr. John Banville. Welcome. Thank you for being our guest. That microphone works as well. If at some point you over there in the back do not hear us clearly, please raise your hand or give us a shout and we will speak up again. Because in the heat of the conversation we might just move our microphones around. Do I need to introduce John Banville to you? I doubt it, but I will anyway, very briefly. He's a renowned Irish author, and also Irish, I should say. He's well known for much-loved novels like The Sea, for which he received the Man Booker Prize, trilogies, novels, at the beginning of his career, on scientists, on artists. There's a small book on Prague, very precious. And he is also Benjamin Black, the author of Murder Mysteries. He's a fearsome literary critic. I recently read a piece by you in The Nation on a biography of Hemingway.
Yes.
That's some while ago.
Well, he deserved a good kicking, didn't he?
Yeah. Fearsome, as I said. But he is here tonight to talk to us about his most recent novel, Mrs Osmond. It's a sequel, so to speak, to Henry James's Portrait of a Lady. And to get into the mood, into the book, especially into the style, into Henry James and John Banville, might I ask you to read a couple of pages and transport us into the novel?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out on such a wet night, but then maybe in Brussels you're used to it, as we are in Dublin. Lovely to be here, lovely to see you. I will read a very short piece in this because I don't know about you, but I find reading exceedingly boring. I don't want to bore myself and I don't want to bore you, but just to give you the sound of the book, the sound of the style. And I haven't read it myself since I wrote it, so I'll probably stumble over it. Isabel Osmond, Isabel Archer, she has returned to England to be at the deathbed of her cousin. Her husband has told her that if she does this, there will be trouble. And throughout this book, there is a great deal of trouble. But in these couple of paragraphs, she has just left the garden court where her cousin Ralph Touchy died, and she's coming back to London. And she's in trouble. She's upset. She's grieving for her cousin who loved her, and she's worried about what's going to happen to her when she goes back to Rome. It had been a day of agitations and alarms, of smoke and steam and grit. Even yet she felt, did Mrs Osmond, the awful surge and rhythm of the train's wheels beating on and on within her. It was as if she were still seated at the carriage window, as she had sat for what seemed impossibly many hours, gazing with unseeing eyes upon the placid English countryside flowing away from her endlessly in all the soft green splendour of the early summer afternoon. Her thoughts had sped along with the speeding train, but, unlike the train, to no end. Indeed, she had never registered so acutely the mind's unstoppable, senseless, headlong rush as she had since leaving Garden Court. The great snorting and smoking brute that had paused with brusque impatience at the meek little village station and suffered her to take her place in one of its latter-most compartments. We're talking about a train here. Her fingertips still retained the impression of hot plush and greasy leather. It now stood gasping after its mighty efforts under the high, soot-blackened glass canopy of the throbbing terminus, disgorging onto the platform its complement of dazed, bedraggled travellers and their jumbles of baggage. Well, she told herself, she had arrived somewhere at least. Staines, her maid, who had hardly stepped down in the train before she flew into an altercation with a red-faced railway porter. Had she not been a female, it might have been said of Staines that she was a fellow with a heart of oak. She was tall and gaunt, a person all of angle, with long wrists and large feet, and a jaw that put one in mind of the blade of a primitive axe. In the years that she had been in Mrs Osmond's employ, or given how closely they were conjoined, better say in the years that they had been together, Staines's devotion to her mistress had not wavered by a jot. In the long period of exile in the south, Staines's forbearance had extended to putting up with the Italian market and the Italian kitchen and, which required an even more saintly fortitude, with Italian plumbing. Indeed, such was her steadfastness that on occasion Mrs Osmond, Isabel, found herself longing wistfully for even half a day's respite from her servant's unrelenting, stone-hard solicitude. In their recent travels together, the chief token and proof of Staines's loyalty had been a permanently maintained state of vexedness, not only in the face of the impudence of porters, cab drivers, boot boys, and the like, but also against what she considered her mistress's wilful credulousness, deplorable gullibility, and incurably soft heart. Now, as the maid, her bonnet fairly wagging from the force of her indignation, stood berating the porter for unspecified shortcomings. As a Londoner, she was exercising her right to quarrel with her own kind in her own city. Isabel moved away with that wide-eyed blandness of manner she had perfected over the years at the scenes of so many similar confrontations between Staines's will and the world's recalcitrance. As I was reading that, I remember a nice anecdote of Heidegger once giving a lecture in Freiburg, and he stopped and said, this is Chinese. I don't understand it either.
I'm sure we understood you perfectly well. A question to begin with. You use the word blandness in relation to Isabel Osmond. Of course, in The Portrait of a Lady, she starts out as Isabel Archer, a very feisty young woman coming to Europe. This is what you wrote is a sequel, hot on the heels of the ending of The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. You needn't have read Henry James, I think, to enjoy Mrs Osmond. But what is good to know about Henry James's story, The Portrait of a Lady, before we start yours?
Well, The Portrait of a Lady, you mean the prequel, yes.
Now,
look, I read The Portrait of a Lady when I came quite late to Henry James. I was well into my 20s. And I believe that the common notion of him, that he was dry and pompous and overblown and all those things. Then I read The Portrait of a Lady and discovered that was all nonsense, that he was the most exciting, most lusciously sensuous writer. There's no sex in Henry James, but it's pervaded with passion and with, as I said, the sensuous. By a strange coincidence, I began to read the book first when I was in Florence, and I was staying in a wonderfully grubby little hotel, which is just around the corner from the hotel in which Henry James began to write The Portrait of a Lady. And then I came to Florence again and was staying in a place. It was just around the corner from a room where he came back a couple of years later, or a year later, to work on the book. So I felt a certain affinity with it. I found in Henry James a voice that was, how would I say, the kind of voice that I'd heard in my head all my short writing life. So I would never have dared when I was young to commit this enormity of writing a sequel to one of the great works of art in the novel form. And I do think that Henry James was the greatest novelist. He was the one who took the novel by a scruff of the neck and shook it and said, we can make a work of art out of you. He was tired of the sentimentality and the cloyiness of the Dickenses. He was tired of the excessive intellectuality of George Eliot. He was tired of the rough and tumble of most of the 19th century novels. So he paved the way for us. So as you see, I'm talking too much, but it has been one of the great enthusiasms of my life. People talk about, in the days when I used to read reviews of my books, which I don't read anymore, people would say I was influenced by Beckett and Bulgakov and who else. Nobody ever seemed to see that I was influenced most of all by Henry James, who was the first great modernist.
So what did he change compared to his predecessors or contemporaries?
As I say, he showed that the novel could be a work of art. Look, the novel is a wonderful form. It's a huge mattress of a thing. Anybody can sleep on it. But what he said is that it can also be honed and shaped into a work of art. The great strength of the novel, especially the 19th century novel, let's say starting with Cervantes. It was a huge, as he said himself in Middlemarch, it was a huge baggy monster. And that was its strength, that you could put anything into it. He said, but there's also another way of doing it, where you turn it into a precise and fashioned and polished and burnished work of art. That was his great revolution. I'll try to be brief. For me, there are two strands of modernism. There's a strand of modernism that went from, let's say, Oscar Wilde up to Joyce, through Beckett, they're all Irishmen. And then there's this strain of modernism that Henry James instituted, but nobody followed him, really. That was a direction in which it was not avant-garde, it remained stolidly middle class, it remained aimed at people like us, and yet was transcendent art. And I prefer that. I think there's a lot to be said for the middle class values, a lot to be said for bourgeois values, even in these times. But this was the version of modernism that was not followed.
In his own preface to Portrait of a Lady, he writes, the thing was under a special obligation to be amusing too, not just high art, entertaining.
Yes, but you say not just high art, but all high art is entertaining. You go to Sophocles at his darkest, you go to Beckett at his darkest, for entertainment, transcendence, for joy. There's nothing more joyful than reading a great dark tragedy. Not because of what, look,
because Schadenfreude.
Not because of Schadenfreude, but it doesn't matter what works of art talk about, it's how they do it. What we go to art for is not, I always say, it's not what people do, it's what people are. That's what the work of art starts out to search for and to find. The essence of things. Beckett always said, I want to strike past the mere doings to the essential. And that's what he does. Of course, he elaborates marvelous stories, marvelous characters, marvelously entertaining. He creates an entertaining world. Beyond that, there is an essential truth, which is not the truth of fact, it's the truth of art.
Is that also the difference between the plotting of a story or preferring character over plot? Or is that too simple?
Well, you see, the plot is a word I never use. Does life have a plot?
We can only tell afterwards, perhaps, and even then.
Yeah, well, won't be. Well, where will we be telling that from?
I don't know.
No, it doesn't. It's incoherent. Life does not have a plot. Of course, we discover things that we didn't know when we were younger. We discover things about, if our lovers or our wife or our husband betrays us, we discover that there's a whole other world going on. But that's part of, in essential and beautiful and tragic way, it's trivial. Beyond that, there is something which is where we actually are in, again, you you see, I become incoherent because that can't be described. That can only be shown in the work of art. Wittgenstein was, although he didn't like art, he was the one who put, some things cannot be said, they must be shown.
You said, when I in my younger years, I wouldn't have dared to take on this kind of project, enterprise. Right, Mrs. Osmond, what made you dare and decide to do it now?
I think it must have been that I needed a change of direction. I'd written a number of books which were obsessive first-person narratives, and my wife was always very subtle. She never says, you must do this, She never shakes her finger. And she said, why don't you go back to that idea you had years ago of writing a sequel to The Portrait Lady? Because I had that idea years ago, and I thought, no, it would be like feasting on the carcass of a great beast. I shouldn't do it. And I thought, what the hell? I'd eat the carcass of the great beast. Look,
it's daunting, no?
I know, not at all.
No?
Nothing
Walking in the park?
Nothing daunts an artist. We're complete egomaniacs. Look at the history of the 20th century. All the great monsters were failed artists. Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Hitler, failed artists. The most dangerous creature in the world is a failed artist. Again, I said to my wife one day, I think I'll give it up. She said, oh yeah, what would you do then? You go into politics? And God help us all. Artists are afraid of nothing. We're cannibals. We eat the world.
So what was your... Did you set out a goal? Did you want to emulate him? How did you approach this project? Or was it just taking Isabel further down the road?
I wanted to show him how it should be done. I was fascinated by Isabel Archer. When I read the book first, when I was a young man, I saw her as the hero. She was a fearless young person striding out into the world, going to take the world by the throat and say, I'm going to live. Then I read it again in middle age. I thought, oh my God, Isabel is just as much of a monster of ego as the rest of them. But I liked her for that as well. Then when I read it on the brink of old age, Go Vidal wonderfully said about Ronald Reagan, he said he's in the springtime of his senescence. When I was in the springtime of my senescence, and I read it again, I saw her as admirable as I had seen her when I was young, but I also I saw the pathos of her life. This is a deeply wounded creature. She's like a fledgling with a broken wing. That image is used throughout the book of the bird, the fledgling fallen from the nest and flapping on the ground in agony. The poor woman is in absolute agony. But she is immensely brave. She's going to go back and deal with Gilbert Osmond and deal with all these awful people who have destroyed her life. So immensely brave. Portrait of Ladies is, I think, whether Henry James meant it or not, is a great feminist novel, and I'd like to think this is as well. I've always liked women. Since I was a child, I liked women. Starting out with my mother and then moving on quickly to girls. Women have always seemed to me much more interesting than men. My idea of hell is eternity with a dinner party of all men. I had that experience once. I did a thing in France. I won't say where in France, but it was at a university, and afterwards there was a supper, there was a lunch upstairs. The reason I say supper is there was 13 men with that glass. And I thought, this is the worst possible experience. And this was France, right? And there was a bottle of wine. 13 men, we each had about that much, and when it was done, it was gone. No more wine was forthcoming. No matter how much I rattled my glass. And at the end of the lunch, sorry, I'll finish quickly. At the end of the lunch,
no rush.
I said, they said, would you like anything else? And I said, yes, I'd like a cognac. And they went, I said, I'd like a double cognac. So, all of which is to illustrate in a silly, roundabout way that I think, I mean, to me, women are infinitely fascinating, infinitely creative. I have 2 daughters. My first marriage, I have 2 sons who are wonderful, wonderful people, older than I am now. But they, all men, continue to have a little knot of puzzlement there. What happened, you know? Where did Mummy went? And I haven't been able to live since then. Whereas girls get to be about 11, and they look at the world and say, ah, yes, I see how it works. But that's when the men come back and say, no, no, you're not going to be allowed to do that. Teachers will tell you how little girls at the age of 9, 10, 11, the cleverest ones in the class, excuse me, will look and say, no, being clever is not going to get me anywhere. So they start being something else. That's your great mistake. Keep the cleverness. Okay. And just to finish, I have 2 daughters who now are very clever, and they are fearsome. Feminist is not the word, they're just fearsome women. If I utter the smallest thing, they light on me like alligators. And they will let me away with nothing. This is wonderful. Young women should now let no man away with anything.
Hear, hear.
Sorry, fellas. I do believe this is, I'm not just cozying up to the women. I've always believed this throughout my life since I was 10 or 11. That no, there's no point in doing this. I was going to say, well, I think that women have. The problem is that I find women so attractive that my judgment is clouded. You know, I just find there's a little old lady of 85 years in the street scrabbling in her purse for her change. I find her attractive. It's just I find women as a species.
Okay, interesting thought, that last one. This is kind of a tribute to women, or it wasn't on your mind like that?
No,
because
you don't make
Isabel Archer moves from bland, as you call her in the beginning, or having perfected these bland thoughts and the bland look in her eyes, to this, she reinvents herself, I think you may say, or rekindles that fierceness in herself.
Oh, yes, I think she realizes who she was all along. And she's been humbled, she's been humiliated. She has learned her lessons, but she's also learned her powers and what she can do, what she can effect in the world. And when I planned the book, I was going to have a happy ending. She was going to meet somebody, she was going to go to America, she was going to go to the New World. I realized that couldn't be. She meets, for those of you who haven't read the book, most of you, she meets somebody at the end who could be that character, but she spots another trap waiting for her. And I think most women, certainly at the end of their lives, realize that they've spent their time either avoiding traps or falling into them. I mean, we could have another conversation about men and our problems, but this is not the occasion for it. I didn't set out to write a feminist book. One sets out to make a work of art. Again, as Gore Vidal wonderfully said, somebody asked him, why did he write this book? He said, because it wasn't there. I set out to write this because it wasn't there. I wanted to make a work of art. The implications of it all come afterwards.
So what is it like then to write it? How does it work? Do you immerse yourself in James to get a sense again of his sentences, or is it like you said in the beginning, his voice was in your head, or how does it go?
Yes, I've been reading Henry James all my life, so the rhythm of his sentences is in my head anyway. But when I started this book, I did go back and read The Portrait of a Lady, the prequel. And I was also doing a semester in
Chicago?
In Chicago, yeah. And it was on Portrait of a Lady and Henry James at the Turn of the Screw. So that was very close reading. And I was writing this book at the same time. And it was the strangest experience. I wasn't there. I'm not mystical, I'm not religious, I don't believe in angels coming down and whispering in my ear, but I really wasn't there when this book was being written. Some days I would pause. No, I wouldn't pause, I'd keep writing, but I would look at my hand writing. I would sit back and watch it writing. I would use words that I didn't quite know the meaning of, then I would look them up and discover that they were the right words. It was a kind of, not automatic writing, but psychologists say that that if you have a task to do, which is in your area but is not the kind of task that you usually do, you can do a kind of self-hypnosis. And I think that's the state that I was in, where, I wasn't there. I would come along and in the morning I would find pages written the day before that I had no memory of. And if I were to read that book now, I wouldn't remember them.
But it sounds like a very thin line between incorporating almost Henry James or being his not translator, but projecting his story forward. And where is John Banville in this then? Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but the answer to that is there's no John Banville. I always
purely
say,
the medium.
Yeah, no, not purely, but the person who sits here, I always say this on occasions like this, the person that you see sitting here is not the person who wrote this book or any of the other books. That John Banville ceases to exist when I stand up from my desk. The John Banville who writes the books, and this is true of any artist, the person who makes the art ceases to exist once he or she stops making the art for the day. That's why, it's wonderful. You stop writing, you think, my God, what crimes have I committed today? And then you stumble out and you say to whatever nice person is cooking your dinner in the kitchen, give me a glass of wine, so that I can become some kind of human who is not that monster in there. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, this is a very strange thing. And we've all experienced this, Language is a very strange medium. You write a letter to your bank manager or to your lover, and you look at it afterwards and you think, this isn't what I meant to say. You say, who's speaking here? It's not who, it's what. Language speaks. Language is the most subtle and the most undermining medium that there is. It says, you use me to speak. You go out, you talk to your bank manager, your lover, you speak. And so what you're doing here is no different, but it's completely different. And it wants to speak, and it speaks, and it constantly tries to subvert what you're doing. Every day, the writer is Jacob wrestling with the angel, and the angel is language, and you end up with a wound, you die. But it's a wonderful thing. Who wouldn't want to be Jacob? Who wouldn't want to wrestle with the angel? But to imagine that, if I were teaching a creative writing class, which God forbid I ever would, I would say to people, don't imagine that you're going to express yourself, because that's not the point of it. First of all, what you're doing is you're making something and putting it into the world, a thing that wasn't there before. But don't imagine that language is going to allow you to express yourself, because it will express itself by some roundabout way. You might come to find that you've said something that you wanted to say, and I would have it written up like that. Kafka's wonderful aphorism, the artist is the one who has nothing to say. I have nothing to say. I only make things and I show things, but I have nothing to say. I have no opinions. I don't exist.
Okay. Another thing you said that struck a chord is that you don't believe in psychology. Am I citing you correctly?
Oh yes, again, another wonderful from the Zura aphorisms of Kafka. He says, never again psychology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, you can elaborate, but I just wondered if you then write a character like Isabel Archer, Mrs. Osmond, in your novel, how does that work? Because we're used to thinking of characters as psychologically sound, thought through characters and so on.
Yeah, it's difficult. I'll try to. The psychology, quote unquote, in a novel like this is merely another part of the form. It's not a thing in itself. Isabel Archer doesn't exist. She's a thing made from words. I love when, the days when I used to read reviews, people would talk about, what the character did afterwards. And Nabokov was wonderful. He said, they didn't do anything afterwards. They stopped because I made them from words. And they don't have a life in the world. But poor old reviewers, and I'm a reviewer myself, I commit this sin constantly of talking about the characters as if they were real. They're not. And their psychology is just another part of the form. It has to be elaborated. Because I still believe, and as I say, this is one of the things that Henry James, his version of modernism, is that there will be a certain amount of realism, of verisimilitude in the work. I find life interesting. I arrive in a city like this, Brussels, which I don't know well. I'm driving in from the airport in a taxi, and I'm looking at the windows and I'm thinking, all those lives going on there. Now look, I know that they're just as banal as my own life, but yet to me there is something absolutely magical about the fact that there are all these people living their own lives. I remember once I'm terrified of air travel, and there was a period about 10 years where I just wouldn't travel at all by air, and the Irish government sent me to Budapest. This was before '89. I won't say why the government sent me to Budapest, but it was to attend a conference. But I took the train down through, I took the boats and trains. And I remember the train I was on, it drew into, I can't remember where it was. But it stopped about half a kilometre short of the station. And there was an apartment building there. All the windows, it was about 6 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening. All the windows were lighted, and of course they had no curtains. And there were all these lives going on. People having their dinner, people bathing their children, people thinking about making love. And I sat absolutely rapt before this, and thinking, there are 500 novels there. I can't do it. I'm absolutely obsessed by the strangeness of life. I mean, life is a very, very strange phenomenon. We were talking, see, this is where we were saying earlier that we should, interviewer and interviewee should never talk before, but we were talking about trees, and the strange life that trees have. They're so slow. Our lives are so interesting and fascinating because they're desperate, because they're so short. We should live for at least 1,000 years, each of us. Well, we don't. We're gone much too quickly. So we have this, we're like squirrels in a thing, trying to have all the experience. I would love to write a novel about every one of those rooms in that apartment building. I've never forgotten it. And even still, when I meet people, and I think I often think that I must make, I'm speaking for all writers, we must make people uneasy, because we look at them with a particular kind of... I remember, I'll put it this way. I remember a friend of mine, he was at a dinner party. She was at a dinner party. And seated opposite with Meryl Streep, the actress. And she said she was so flattered because Meryl was so interested in her, was asking her everything about her life. And they said, halfway through the dinner, she realised that Meryl was simply studying her. Was getting her. She was a character that she could play. Writers are like that.
Stealing all the time.
Stealing, we not only steal, we eat. We are cannibals. We eat everybody that comes near us. We're like those plants that eat spiders. and we've got something. Again, this, I hear myself saying this is not true either. There's another side in which we are completely uninterested in human beings.
Because it's all about art, in the end.
Yeah,
it's all functional.
It's all functional. So exactly. It's just in order to make a thing. We're not the only people. I remember talking to a journalist friend of mine, and she used to write a weekly column in the Irish Times. And we were having lunch, and I stupidly, because I was myself a journalist, I said, I so admire you. You have all these opinions. And she said, I haven't got any opinions. I'm a journalist. It's the same for novelists. We haven't got any interest in life. Life is only material for us to turn it into something else. It's pathetic, really. We're sick human beings. But isn't it wonderful that sick human beings can produce
beautiful works of art? Can you still enjoy? Do you read novels at all? Still fiction?
Oh yes, I don't read as much as I used to. Somehow, when you get old, I remember when I was young, reading an essay by George Steiner, which started off by saying, "Old men don't read novels." I get furious. And when I got to know George Steiner, I said, I was furious at you, and he said, "But I'm right." Now that I'm an old man, I realise that's right.
And why is that?
There's something in fiction, in stories, that somehow you don't need when you get to a certain age.
It has a sell-by date?
Yeah, I'm afraid we have sell-by dates. But now, having said that, I've begun to read a writer whom I never had any thoughts about before, Anthony Paul, who wrote a thing called Dance to the Music of Time, a 12-novel series. Minor work, but I've been reading it on the plane today, and I'm reading it, absolutely fascinated by it. Again, my wife says to me, John, fiction is quite good, it's quite interesting, you should try it.
And I'm told at one point you were also an avid binge watcher of television series. Is that still the case?
Oh, I still watch. Well, I'm kind of going off them now. One of the reasons is that all these television series, especially the Scandinavian ones, start out with a young woman being raped and murdered and chopped up and thrown into a garbage bin. And I have 2 daughters. Even if I hadn't 2 daughters, I think, again, women should rise up against this and say, this is not good. There are little guys in anoraks in rooms watching this stuff and thinking, yeah, I could do that. But to answer the general question, there is extraordinary work being done by Netflix, by HBO, by Showtime. They seem to be doing what the 19th century novel did. They're telling the story of how humankind fares, how humankind makes itself. I mean, my friend Richard Ford, who I think is one of the finest novelists at work now, I say to him, you're so lucky, American novelists are so lucky, because the wave of modernism never reached American shores. The American novel is still the 19th century novel, because they still have the great theme, which is the making of a nation. And even now, I'm sure there are young novelists sharpening their pens or their iPods or whatever they write on nowadays, because America has suddenly become incoherent again. That's one. So the 19th century novel is alive and well in America, and it's alive and well in these series.
Yeah, and by this you mean the baggy monster and the fact that you can throw life in all its variety in
and
it.
That's wonderful. When people want to do it, we artistically are at the end of a cycle of civilization. Art is. Hegel was right. Art is dying in our time. It's a wonderful opportunity, to be an artist at the end of a cycle of art and culture is because I have endless amounts of stuff to play. I feel that I'm a child playing in the Forum in Rome. There's all this wonderful wreckage, and I can assemble it into anything. The television series, I think, what I thought for a while, I'm not sure now, took over the need for narrative, the need for stories that we have. We're all children at bedtime wanting a story, no matter how old we are.
And you feel there's less space for that now in Europe's literary tradition where we are now?
Yeah, the novel has been, we've worn it out. But I regard that as good because now the novel is free to be something else. It can become much more poetic, can become much more dense, and it can, as I said, strike beyond the mere doings of human beings to the essence of what we are.
But then it becomes more philosophical, perhaps.
Oh yeah, and there'll be very few readers for it. But
wouldn't that be a pity?
Well, who knows what? You know, we all work for the generations to come. Who knows what will happen in 100 years' time? There may be people reading me, for all I know. And the novels. I mean, Cambridge University Press used to do a wonderful series, I don't think they do it anymore, which is called the Critical Companion to or something, and it would run contemporary reviews of Henry James and Conrad and so on. And to read those reviews of Henry James's book, his books were dismissed, especially the later ones. There would be, 5 novel reviews.
Outdated or...
Just say, this is just the usual Henry James, the sentences are too long, who wants to know about this? These are transcendent works of art. They weren't appreciated at that time. And in a way, how could they be? They're so complex, they're so large, they're larger than their time. A real work of art requires time to sink into the general consciousness. I mean, you live in a city which has superb art galleries. Did the people who commissioned those paintings, did they know how great they were? They didn't. They were just things they could put on the wall to show how rich they were. Once the work of art breaks free from its time, Gulliver's Travels, for instance, was written as a political tract. Who now knows, other than scholars, who knows anything about that? But the work, once it broke free from its political time, became a great freestanding work of art that will live for as long as there are readers to read. So it's nothing to do with his time, it's to do with after time. So this is how people like me, we comfort ourselves. Sorry, they're all you people there. Stay away from me. This is how people like me comfort ourselves. They, posterity will justify me. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. If my work dies, it dies. A few sentences will survive. Wouldn't that be nice?
Could you have been anything but a writer? Was there a fork in the road at one point?
I tried when I was a teenager to be a painter, but I had no talent whatsoever. I couldn't draw, I had no sense of colour, no sense of draftsmanship, all of which are distinct disadvantages if you want to be a painter. And I painted some truly, truly dreadful pictures, and I think my brother has some of them still. I've told him I will pay him good money in cash if he will give me these things so I can destroy them. I was dreadful. But it was useful because I was telling Tilda earlier, it allowed me to look at the world in a different way, with the painter's eye, and that's good for writing. So the 2 or 3 years when I was making a fool of myself trying to be a painter weren't entirely wasted.
And then the only alternative was writing.
Oh, well, I was writing at the same time. I started writing when I was about 12, and I've been doing it since then. Any day now I might actually learn how to do it. One is constantly learning, practicing.
So there's no... every time you finish a project, you're already thinking ahead of the next.
Oh yeah, when I finish a project, I hate it. It makes me feel physically sick. Well, you get about maybe a day of euphoria just because you finished it. You've been released, you're like a hot air balloon. You're free. And then the next day you think, oh Christ, now I have to revise this thing. And then you get the proof copy when you really have to read it and all like that. How could I have done this? How could I have perpetrated this crime against humanity? but you have to let it go. Shame propels. I think real artists are propelled by shame.
Wanting to do better every time. And
get it right this time. Get it right. Of course you never get it right. We know we won't. It's a strange thing when you start a book, you know, and of course that's where the real euphoria is when you're starting a book. Everything is possible. Look, I can do anything here. And then you're halfway through it and you're wading through mud up to your armpits and you're trying to struggle out of this quagmire. And then a day comes when you think, I can't do any more with this. I just let it go, give it up. And you comfort yourself by reminding yourself that Valérie saying, you know, no work of art is ever finished, only abandoned. But you know you've abandoned it. You know there's been another act of cowardice for which one will have to make another bad work of art.
No way around
There's
it.
no way around it. Look, every now and then, we wouldn't keep doing it if it weren't that. I always say this, you know, when you hit your fingernail against an empty wine glass, you hear this ping. Every now and then you write a sentence and you look at it and you think, oh, I got that right. There's something wrong with it, but I got it as near to right as it can possibly be. Randall Jarrell, great American critic, he defined a novel as an extended work of prose fiction which has something wrong with it. And that's true. Every work of art has something wrong with it. There's no perfection.
Flaw in the perfection.
Well, I mean, there's no perfection. This is what drives us. You know, get it right, get it right. There's a wonderful little short novel by Robert Coover called "Spanking the Maid." And it's about a man who every morning the maid comes in and he has to spank her. And it's just chapter after chapter after, as I said, it's a short book. And he's just trying to get it right, spank the maid the right way. It's very funny, outrageous,
not very woman-friendly.
disgraceful. No, but the point is, she's trying to help him to get him to spank her the right way. And it's all about trying to make a work of art. You just get it right. Here's this beautiful creature, you know. You say, bend over, and you know you're going to get it right. You're going to get it wrong, over and over again.
I want to ask you about being a literary critic.
I'm not a critic, I'm a book reviewer.
Okay, book reviewer. What's the difference?
A critic sets a work, first of all, it's a work that's already been published, and he sets it within the history of literature, the canon, and so on. A book reviewer is somebody who gets a book that people haven't read yet and says, here's my initial impression of this. I may be wrong, I think this is good, or I think it's right. That's all we do. I shouldn't say it's all we do. It's a very necessary and honourable calling, but it's not criticism.
Okay, point made. James Wood, another very well-known critic, has recently published his first novel and has said that he is, looking back, he would be a little more generous perhaps towards debutantes especially, knowing now what he knows about the process of writing and what happens and how harsh it can be to be really knocked down by a reviewer.
If you're knocked down by a review, you shouldn't have been writing in the first place.
Okay.
You know,
so no regrets on your part for being too harsh?
Oh, I wrote a very, in some parts of the world, very famous review of Ian McEwan's Saturday, which savaged it. If I were back there now, I would write it in a different way. I wouldn't say anything differently, but I would shift the emphasis, because what I was writing about, it was after 9/11, and this book was greeted as the 9/11 novel. It's a bad book, nothing to do with 9/11, and I was furious at the reviewers for, you know, the laziness, and it was them I was attacking rather than the author. So as I say, I would turn it on its head. That's the only regret I have, but I would not say anything differently about the book.
But what is important about book reviews? Why do people, I mean, because sometimes you hear like people don't even read them anymore because they think, oh well, I don't like what this book reviewer likes or doesn't like. So there's a sort of wariness about it. But what do you think is the importance of book reviews?
Well, the main reason for the lack of interest in book reviews now is the book reviewers are not paid enough to do
A proper job.
So they're just sort of dashing things off. Now, some of them are, not all of them are, but it does help to be paid decent money. I mean, Edmund Wilson, Lionel Trilling, Ronald Jewett, they made a living out of this. They, made quite a good living out of book reviewing. So it meant that the standards were kept up, the standards of book reviewing. If you don't do it with passion, if you don't do it with absolute commitment and with absolute honesty, then you are committing a sort of a small crime. Because, look, Cyril Connolly, a great book reviewer from 60s, 70s, he said, the reviewer has to keep in mind that even a bad book took pains to write. It was painful to write. If I get a book now that is just dreadful, I would just send it back and say, look, I'm just not going to review this. This is my friends say to me, John, you seem so much nicer than you are because you never do anything nowadays but give good reviews. That's only because I send back the ones I hate. I'm tired. I
don't want to spend energy.
I don't want to do. It's not so much energy. I don't want to. I want to be passionate about things that I want passionately people to read. I did my period as an arbiter of taste and quality, so that's gone. I just want enthusiasm now. But if I were back then, I would be reviewing the way that I did review, which is that every book requires absolute attention, absolute concentration. And, well, again, I use the word passion. There's no point doing anything if you don't do it with passion.
Mm-hmm. Passion, art. I wonder, a man of your stature, are you often asked about your opinion on things that go on in the world? And if so, do you answer and share your opinions?
I say to people, look, why don't you ask a plumber or a brain surgeon? They know more about the world than I do.
So you don't feel, as a writer, you have a role or a responsibility in the public debate as a public intellectual?
My only responsibility, again to quote Cyril Connolly, the artist's only responsibility is to produce a masterpiece. What's it matter what I say about Brexit or Russian
There
poison
goes my next
people?
question and another question.
Look, if you want to talk to me as a citizen, in that case, anybody could be sitting up here. The only reason I'm sitting here is that I write these books. But they have nothing to do with Brexit or that. That's the mere doings.
Yeah. Could it
No,
inspire you to write about, produce a work of art?
Oh. Well, yes, it could, if I felt that I... But you see, works... It's very hard
for
to
example,
explain.
last night, Robert Manassa was here, who wrote a very well-received novel set in Brussels and in the European institutions, for example. First of its kind. It's not literally about what's going on right now, but it's inspired by it.
But he was inspired to do that. I hope he didn't think, I know what will do well. I'll write a book about Europe, and if you do that, that's death. It's like worrying about your audience. If I were to think, I want the largest number of people to read this book, how could I succeed? Huge incoherent.
A tailored story.
If I were, I write these so-called crime books, which are. He's supposed to be making money for me, with the bastard won't. I wish he would.
We're talking about Benjamin Black.
But they're just. Look.
What's that then? How did those come about?
It's craft work. How did it come about? I had written a television series, which wasn't going to get made, and I hate to waste anything. And I thought one day I'll turn it into a crime novel, and then I got I saw that I could do it again. I thought maybe this guy will do my day job for me, maybe he'll make some money for me. And I stuck with him.
So how does that work? He writes on a Sunday afternoon?
No, he writes during the summer.
Ah, okay, really?
Summer. Summer is the most boring season. Everything is dead. People think that nature is dead in winter. It's not. Nature in winter is throbbing on the ground. Whereas in summer, I'm saying, oh, I'm tired. So I kill the summers by
it takes you, what, 2-3 months? And
yeah.
That's quick, right?
Well, Banville, you know, it could take anything from 2 to 5 years to write a book. But it's an entirely different thing I'm producing. It's
to pay the bills.
Well, as I say, we should pay the bloody bills.
At least that.
Yeah, at least that. You know, pay is keep.
Okay.
But anyway, just to answer, to finish answering the question, if one were to set out to write a book on a particular theme, a particular program behind a particular politics in the broadest sense, then it will fail, because what you'll get is neither good politics nor good art. 1984 is a prime example of that. It's bad politics and it's bad art. Now, it's a great object.
Yeah.
It's a great object, and it had, you know, it was hugely influential, but it's nothing to do with the art of fiction.
But the interesting thing is that, again, Henry James, in the preface to Portrait of a Lady, also refers to the international buzz that was going on. Buzz is not the word he uses, but it's and some of it he wanted to be part of this book, or to fuel this book somehow. So
well, yes, he saw himself as an international artist, writing about the international scene. But, you know, he was mistaken.
How so?
Because the more closed works, because, see, I think the work of art is a closed object. It resists. It doesn't invite you in. It says,
it's finished in itself.
In itself, it's finished, and it is burnished. It has an enamel surface, and you have to peck away at it to get into it. Any real work of art is mysterious and enclosed and private. Not the artist's privacy, but the work itself has a kind of privacy that you have to invade. You know, you go to the museum and you stand in front of a picture, and if you stand there for long, the picture is looking at you. It's saying, you're not going to understand me. You know, keep trying. Come back tomorrow.
It's not supposed to be easy in your world, is it?
Well, no. Easy?
I don't know, I'm just asking.
What's the point of easy? Easy
you have to work
boring.
for it.
Easy is, you know. And nothing in the world is easy. We, in order to live, we glide over the difficulties of life. I shouldn't say the difficult, the complexities of life. The world is an extraordinary place. We are extraordinary beings. The only thing I've ever written in any of my novels that's me speaking is a little paragraph in one of my books where a character says, I've never got used to being on this earth. I think our presence here is due to a cosmic blunder. That he said, he goes on and he says, I wonder how they're getting on, the people in the world that was meant for us over there on the other side of the universe. He says, no, they would have been extinct long ago. How would they have survived, these gentle earthlings, in a world made to contain us? We are extraordinary creatures. We are the most powerful and destructive virus this planet has ever known. I suspect that any day now the planet will give us a virus that will be bigger than us. We'll get rid of us. And I have this wonderful vision of the world after us, where things are growing again. There's a superb poem by Thomas Hardy called Before Time and After. And it's too English and too complicated. But he says, you know, there was a time there was, before the birth of consciousness, before us. Nobody worried about destruction, nobody worried about pain, nobody says, when will that time come again? When? And I long for that as well. Of course, I love life. I look at my grandchildren, I think, I hope they will live forever, I hope their children will. But there's another side of me that wishes that we would go, the virus would be killed.
Quiet. Steve?
But let's not end on that note.
No.
Everybody.
I was going to ask you, did you ever meet Stephen Hawking by any chance?
No, no.
No.
I gave him a very bad review to Brief History of Time.
You did?
Well, I thought it was nonsensical. He said, when we discovered we'll know the mind of God, no self-respecting scientist should have said something so silly.
Mm.
And he should have known better, and he did know better. Sorry,
for sure.
I like to speak ill of the dead.
One critical note in what is almost a hagiography, if that's an English word. Rather.
No, but people, you see, we're so petty and childish. We need heroes. I think it was Goethe who said, "Blessed is the land that has heroes." Brecht, not a very good example, but Brecht said, "Woe betide the land that needs heroes." We shouldn't need heroes. We are all our own heroes.
Mm-hmm.
We live in this mad age. You were asking me earlier about novelists commenting on social issues. We live in this mad celebrity era. I look at my eldest son, who's obsessed with celebrity. I say to him, these are just grubby little people who've clawed their way to the top. Don't give them any time. It's just because they're on television, they're making millions. They're nobody. But he can't believe that. They're known and I'm not. They must be better than I am. This is absurd.
It's about a view from outside again, isn't it? Being seen and then trying to be free of that as...
Well, look, I mean, I can understand it. We all want to make our mark on the world. We all want to be acknowledged for what we imagine we are.
Or create.
I mean, I suppose... I remember I was talking about this once, and somebody said, "Well, why didn't you write all your books under a pseudonym?" It's a good question. It's a very good question. One that if I'm honest, I'd say because I want my name in the front of the books.
Even if they get in the English version a cover that reminds you of Jane Austen. And I was going to ask you about Jane Austen because I read that you never ever finished one of Jane Austen's books.
Well, you don't need to finish one of Jane Austen's books because you read the first paragraph and know exactly what's going to happen.
Okay.
A spirited young woman who nobody takes any notice of is going to marry the bad-tempered squire who has lots of money.
And there goes Jane Austen.
You asked me why I don't read her.
Yeah.
Millions of people get the greatest pleasure from Jane Austen. Good luck to them.
Okay. Let me then, before I open the floor, yes, thank you very much. Let me ask you what we should read, if not Jane Austen, and not, obviously we're going to read, or we have read, Mrs Osmond, but anything you want to recommend as someone you want to put on a...
No, that would be invidious, but I have to say that the process of reading is a little miracle in itself. Black marks on a white space, we turn them into ideas, images, fantasies, philosophies. It is an extraordinary process. And I always tell the story that when my wife and I, we were young and had no money, I must have won a prize or something, we bought a dishwasher. And the instruction booklet for the dishwasher was written in beautiful English. Really crisp, clear, moments of witticism, things like saying, obviously any help you can give to the dishwasher will be appreciated. The point is, good writing can appear anywhere. So when these smartphones came in first, I didn't know what they were. And I was sitting on a bus one day, and all these people were standing, going to their phone. I said to my friend, I said, what are they doing? He said, they're reading. and we're still reading. Umberto Eco said that it seemed in the 1970s that Western civilization was going to become completely image-based. He said, and then new technology came out, and no matter how much you might hate it, everybody's still reading. Unfortunately, everybody's now writing as well.
I was going to say that's an upbeat note on which to end, and then
just before, yes. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your chance to ask. We've time for a couple of questions to ask a question. Please stand up, speak up loudly, tell us your name and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Maria McLaughlin. I'm Irish, as you can perhaps gather from the name, and I live in Brussels. And I'm fascinated, I've always been fascinated by your stance vis-a-vis Ireland, or your status as an Irish writer. As the lady mentioned at the beginning, and I'm quite curious as to why she put it that way, he's an Irish writer, or perhaps he's a writer who also happens to be Irish. I say that I'm fascinated because it seems to me that if you look at the contemporary Irish writers, you're the one whose work is somehow more hermetic in terms of Irish society. You don't talk very much about it. Your novels are usually not set particularly in Ireland, except perhaps the Book of Evidence. And I'm just wondering, is there some reason for that, or do you feel yourself to be more an international writer, or do you think it's irrelevant? Your place of origin is completely irrelevant. And the other question that I just
my goodness, there are two.
Sorry,
that's all right.
I had wanted to come to the Robert Manassa talk last night. I wasn't able to. I'm very disappointed that I wasn't, because it seems to me I work in the European institutions myself, and we are desperately in need of a writer of the European institutions and the whole national which it is. And I do think it can be an art form. If you look at something like Veep, you mentioned Netflix and Home Box Office, or House of Cards, we have nothing here, and so we have this kind of autistic organisation that seems to be a mystery, and I somehow think that an artist might be able to help us to break that out.
Voila, your work cut out for you.
Yeah. Did all of you hear the question? It's about the first part of what? Did you all hear it?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. I'm a European, always have been, absolutely committed. I have no shred of nationalism in me whatsoever. I regard, I feel as much at home in California. I'm sure if I would go to Kazakhstan, I would feel as much at home there as I do in Ireland. I don't see that there's anything special about having been born by accident in a particular country. Secondly, an artist has no, as I said earlier, an artist has no duty except to produce a masterpiece. As a citizen, I'm deeply concerned with Europe. I thought, as many of us did, that the bureaucrats, and I'm all for bureaucracy, by the way, give me bureaucrats any day. The ones to be really afraid of are the people with the big idea who say, follow me, I know how to do it, let's kill the Jews, let's leave the EU, they're the dangerous ones. The bureaucrats, the people who go into work at 9 in the morning, have their lunch, flirt with somebody, go home in the evening, pat their kids on the head, watch television, have their dinner, go to bed, go into work next day. They're the people who should be running the world. And they were assembling the United States of Europe quietly without telling anybody. The crash in 2008 destroyed that. All the resentment that followed that, as we see now in Brexit and in Trump in America. I could go on like this all night, but I can't write about it because that's not... If that would produce a work of art, then I would write about it. But I have to follow my dictates, the things that tell me this is what you should do. I would love to contribute, but I'll tell you two things. A Spanish journalist came to Dublin some years ago and was interviewing various people. It was after the crash, and it was mostly about economics. But I had known him in Barcelona, so he interviewed me as well. And he interviewed our Minister for Finance. And at the end of the interview, the Minister for Finance said, "Who else are you speaking to?" And he said, "Well, I'm speaking to this journalist and this economist, and I'm also speaking to novelist John Banville." The Minister said, "Don't speak to him, he's only a tourist here." The other day, my son, who works in RT, which is the national radio station, he was talking to a colleague of his, said, "You're Banville, it's your father." And the guy on the other said, "No, he only writes for foreigners." This just shows me how parochial that poor little country is still. And they go on about Joyce. I think the reason that I'm disliked in Ireland, and I have a bigger reputation in Spain or Belgium than I have in Ireland. I've almost forgotten about it in Ireland now. I think the reason is I stayed there. If I'd gone into exile, no Irish artist ever emigrated, they all went into exile. If they'd gone into exile, they would be saying, "Oh, Banville over there in Venezuela." It's the fact I insulted them by staying there. What was the second question? Well, the second question, I'm answering both. As a citizen, I feel absolutely in despair about what's happening in Europe, what's happening to Europe. We'd all gather together and say to the Brits, "Go. Go back out there into that cold sea and see how you do. Let them have it. Let them have it in all senses." I'm very disappointed in them.
It's not all the Brits who want that.
Sorry? Well, I know. But anyway, I think that if the European adventure, that great adventure that started, what was it, the coal and steel union back in after the war, if that fails, that would be a total disaster. Because we are still an amazing little place. If you look at it on the globe, it's just a tiny little place. And look what we have done. And I say this when I'm in Ireland as well. I say, look what we've done. I say, the Anglo-Normans invaded here. It's always the poor old English that get blamed for it. In fact, it's Anglo-Normans. And we lost our language, which was a disaster for us, an absolute disaster. But we took the language we were given, and look what we did with it. This is how to triumph in the world. Not to be constantly moaning and groaning and being nationalist and complaining. Live in the world, the great world.
Thank you, that's very clear. Another question, in the middle.
Hello, my name is Dorothy. I'm Irish too.
There's
Is
actually
there
a
anybody here who isn't Irish?
Sorry. Hello. Is this working? Yeah. My name is Dorothy. I'm Irish too, from Wexford, where I think you're from. I understood anyway. I wanted to get back to your comment. You said life is too short. No, life is too short for humans. You said. Yes, you did say that. And I'm reading a book at the moment called On the Shortness of Life by Seneca, where he says actually life is not too short. It's the way we use our life that, we're distracted by things like, people, by work, by things like that. And I just want to ask you a provocative question about novels. Do you think novels perpetuate that kind of distraction by leading us into, examining somebody's life and following somebody's life? Or can the novel do the contrary and help us to focus on those kind of essential things of life?
Well, it depends on the novel. I mean, most novels, as most things in life, are banal. In any generation, there are only 1 or 2, 3, 4 great artists. God forbid it should be otherwise. We'd be, you wouldn't be able to live. There'd be so much art around. And most novels are merely entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. But some novels, like The Portrait of a Lady, is a great work of art. And that gives a true picture of how things are. That nothing is definite. That we can know very little about each other and about ourselves. All those things, I don't need to rehearse them all. The great novel enhances life. And look, all that art does, it doesn't make us better, it doesn't change the world. W.H. Auden is right, Poetry makes nothing happen. But a great work of art quickens the sense of being alive. When you look at a great painting, read a great novel, great poem, listen to a great piece of music, you have that sense. Quicken. It's the only word I can think of. That sense of, what a marvellous adventure it is to be here, just for 70 years, a moment of time, tiny instant on this extraordinary place, but to be here, as Rilke says, being here is much. That's what the work of art does. Don't look to the work of art with apologies, don't look to the work of art to do anything political or social or anything else. All it does, it addresses the essence of a human being and says, I'm helping you to realize what you are. It won't last, you won't change. Tomorrow you'll be just the same person. An hour after you finish the book or finish listening, you'll be as you were. But for that moment, that's not to be gainsaid. That is extraordinarily precious.
One last question. No, you are right. This was a very good moment to land on. Or not?
It's okay, it's a good moment.
Okay, I'm glad we agree on that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Banville will be here with us still a bit longer to sign copies that you might want to put in front of him.
Yes, you've had the spiel, now you have to buy the snake oil.
That's how it works. Before
By
I'm
the way,
going
is there anybody here who isn't Irish? All right,
a
good.
couple.
If I'd known you were all Irish, I would have given a completely different answer.
Really? What would that have been?
Look, I tell you, just before we finish.
Yeah.
You have to answer the question.
What was the question?
What would the line be?
What?
If everybody were Irish here, what would you say?
No, I said I'd give a completely different answer.
Ah,
But I tell you have to be very careful. I'll tell you a terrible story. I don't know anything about Twitter or Twitter, all that stuff. I was doing a thing like this in Cork. All of you know where Cork is. I thought I'm far from Dublin, I'm far from anywhere. And somebody in the audience asked if I was influenced by a certain very, very, very famous writer. I said, that writer is of no consequence, he's merely a celebrity. And within half a second, it was, what's the word? It had gone viral. There were stories about it in the New York Times. And I learned something really appalling. Free speech is gone. One of the few consolations in the writing life was to say terrible things about your colleagues behind their backs. I do it more. I never mention a name in public anymore. It's gone. And it really is, this is terrible.
you know there's actually a Twitter account in your
That's
name.
right, yeah.
It's a fake one, and it's John Banville, John_Banville.
Yeah. It's
Having
funny.
fights and friendships with other writers like Joy Bean and Roddy Doyle.
No, my son shows it to me now and then. It's quite funny. It seems to be harmless.
As long as people know it's not really you.
Oh, a lot of people think it is me. People will say, I agree with you about such and such. But the world is going crazy. I mean, it's you know.
Does it worry you, really?
Oh, yes.
All this opinionating and...
Look, most people's
Flashing
opinions
lines.
are not worth hearing over the breakfast table, including my own. Why should they be broadcast to the world? I consider social media to be social incontinence.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we have time for. I thank you very much for being here. I have to thank Querido as well, publisher of the Dutch version, and the Irish Embassy who helped made this event possible.
Oh my God, the Irish Embassy.
Actually, they are preparing St. Patrick's Day's festivities tomorrow, so...
Your report already, I'm doomed.
Thank you very much, but most of all, John Banville, thank you very much.